Владимир Владимирович Путин.
I think that in Putin's entourage, there are people who implement whatever they think, not always even explicit, whatever they think his policies should be or he wants the policies to be. How much of it directly comes from Putin or how much of it just fits into the whole KGB, Stalin, Putinist system, which is kind of a hybrid of all of those things.
One goal is to create great Russia and to be in power in this great Russia. This is the goal which justify all kinds of means, whether it is war in Chechnya, or it's intrigues in Ukraine, or it's manipulating by gas, or it's just putting down all opponents, or it's just control on media, or it's just special relations with Iran, whatever.
In March 2000, Vladimir Putin, an obscure ex-KGB man, is elected as president of Russia. What thoughts cross the new president's mind as he climbs these stairs to the throne of the Tsars? Is he thinking of his games on the banks of the Neva in Leningrad, now called St. Petersburg once more? Of when he was king of the gang in the communal apartment block where his family shared 2 rooms? Is he picturing the heroes of his youth like Yuri Gagarin, sensing the presence of the Tsars, whose shadows linger within these walls? Or is his mind fixed on the mission he has set himself, to save Russia, whatever the cost, from the chaos left by his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin?
Patriotic and fascinated by Tsarist imperialism in his youth, Vladimir Putin was also deeply influenced by the Soviet regime. The country that has elected him is thirsty for a new hero who will revive national strength and pride. Even the memories of Stalin's purges seem obliterated by disillusion with the present. The Russian people are nostalgic for past glory.
The first key to Vladimir Putin's future destiny is his early passion for the secret services. As a boy, he spends hours at the local cinema watching a Stalinist classic, The Heroic Deeds of a Secret Agent. Single-handed, the hero changes the destiny of a whole nation.
особые глаза и злость. Надо очень любить свою родину. Сентиментальность.
Значит, однажды он ко мне подходит и спрашивает: ты не подскажешь мне, как попасть в эту организацию, потому что у меня есть товарищ, который хочет в этой организации работать. А в силу того, что у моего брата был товарищ, который там работал, то тогда я говорю: хорошо, я спрошу, узнаю.
Я обратила внимание, а что это у него стало все на замках? На столе ничего на письменном, кроме свежих газет. Думаю, вот это да. Это где же такой молодой человек наш трудится, что у него теперь такой образцово-показательный порядок стал на столе.
At the age of 16, Vladimir Putin knocks on the door of the KGB headquarters in St. Petersburg and asks to join. He is told that the KGB alone decide who and when they recruit. However, they advise him to study languages and law. Vladimir Putin is 23 and in his 4th year at law school when the organization contacts him.
Mr. Putin belongs to that generation of Russians who joined the KGB in 1975, when they knew perfectly well about the crimes committed by Stalin, about the role the Soviet state security played in the dramatic history of my country.
When Putin joins the KGB, the chairman is Yuri Andropov, later to replace Leonid Brezhnev as head of state. The KGB represented the nation's elite for Andropov and helped him rule the country with an iron fist, persecuting political dissidents. But Andropov also knew that if the USSR was to survive, it needed to drastically reorganize its economy.
The Soviet leadership realized that they're in a deep structural crisis by beginning of 80s. Andropov understood that they have to prepare some changes because otherwise the country will collapse. That was done secretly. It was not announced to the public. It was done quietly. They worked out the whole policy of perestroika, which later Gorbachev inherited.
Today, Putin continues to pay homage to his mentor. Yuri Andropov unknowingly transmitted his vision of the state and his economic objectives to Vladimir Putin, influencing his own politics.
Putin's portrait now dines in the private restaurant of Lubyanka at KGB headquarters in Moscow, in the company of former chairmen like himself, Yuri Andropov, the Chekist Felix Dzerzhinsky, Lavrenti Beria, notorious executor of Stalin's purges. All of them are Putin's proud heritage.
He's all man for all people. He's for the past, he's for the future. It's very hard to sort of distinguish all this currents in him. That's what makes him a great man or a great president for the country that is obsessed with its own greatness and its own image. And, you know, I think Putin is using Khrushchev's car of 1956. It's a sign. I mean, in terms of PR, it's like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean? I'm using Khrushchev's car. I'm a descendant of his politics.
Having so much fun, we're going for another lap.
The young KGB officer's first post is in St. Petersburg, where, as a minor officer, he is involved in the hunt for dissidents. 10 years later, he is posted to Dresden in East Germany. With the help of the Stasi, the East German Secret Service, his mission is to recruit informers. Inspired by Andropov, he also builds a network of business contacts, which will be very useful in later years.
Upgraded to lieutenant colonel, Putin is still in Germany at the fall of the Berlin Wall. The world around him collapses. He asks for military support. The Kremlin remains silent. Putin feels that he and his country have been betrayed. He has no other choice than to return to St. Petersburg. It is probably at this moment that his vision for the future of the country is born.
Appointed as a reserve officer at the University of St. Petersburg, Putin encounters his former law professor, Anatoly Sobchak, an ally of Boris Yeltsin, the Democrat reformer. At that time, General Oleg Kalugin is the head of the KGB in St. Petersburg, in command of 3,000 officers. When Kalugin later criticizes Putin's war in Chechnya, Putin accuses him of treason. He is forced to leave Russia.
Sobchak, the man who was one of the earlier Russian reformers, said, Oleg, I'm looking for some guy from the KGB in St. Petersburg who I could rely on. Could you offer me some name, someone? Because listen, I do not know the organization, and I know I could not be the mayor of the city without having some friends or some kind of a relationship inside.
Putin joins Sobchak's election campaign team and helps him become mayor of the city. It is a decisive moment in the KGB officer's career, his first entry into politics. The KGB needs inside informers. Putin becomes the link between the organization and Sobchak.
The idea is probably to identify people who are going to be major players, major political players in Russia within the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And to put enough KGB personnel around those people to secure that when those people will be moved to the next position, those people from KGB are going to be around. And that's how you secure that the system, in this particular case, KGB system, will stay into power. And that's exactly what's happening with Vladimir Putin.
Putin feels at home with the KGB strategy of control, discreetly observing and learning, never revealing personal ambitions. Throughout his career, this will be one of the keys to his own system. In 1991, a wind of revolt sweeps through the Soviet republics. Vladimir Putin is 39, and the USSR is in its last throes. President Gorbachev plans political reforms considered dangerous by the conservative KGB generals. They attempt a putsch. With Gorbachev's blessing, the Democrat reformer and leader of the Russian Republic, Boris Yeltsin, leads the resistance against the putschists. In St. Petersburg, Yeltsin's ally, Anatoly Sobchak, is also supported by the population, tired of 70 years of communist rule. The putschists are defeated, the generals arrested, and the KGB is in disgrace. Putin realizes that it's in his own interest to stay with the winning camp and the reformers. Like many, he resigns from the KGB, but will never forget his allegiance to the organization and its methods. During his 15 years of service, he had made the KGB system his own. At the end of 1991, Yeltsin declares the sovereignty of Russia. Gorbachev resigns, the USSR is dismantled, the Soviet republics become independent. Putin will never forget these events. Later he declares they were the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of the century. But did Vladimir Putin imagine that 10 years later he would become the Dauphin of Boris Yeltsin?
The important things which Yeltsin did, first, he prohibited Communist Party. He banned the Communist Party of Soviet Union out of existence. That was important. That immediately took the main core out of the whole system, and it all kind of fell apart. But he didn't finish it. That was the only thing he did.
They completely forgot that Communist Party was strong and powerful only because it had, during all these years, KGB behind the Communist Party. And this was the irony. Communist Party disappeared. Communist Party was destroyed very quickly. Everybody quietly forgot about KGB.
In St. Petersburg, as we know, Putin was put in charge of the foreign relations, and in that capacity he served for a year or so. Later he was picked up by Sobchak as deputy mayor, and his job as deputy mayor was privatization, which was a very lucrative and very area, lots of shadows.
Владимир Путин выступал в роли эксперта, когда к нам приходили различные зарубежные компании, банки и так далее. Дрезденбанк, Креди Лионе – это были первыми банками, которые открыли свои филиалы в России. Ну а уж самую страшную зиму 90-91 года Петербург оказался на грани голода. Самая большая гуманитарная помощь была как раз из Германии, и ее тоже организовывал Путин.
Putin uses his network of business friends in Germany to create a system of barter. Creating exportation licenses, he organizes the exchange of oil for food. He has perhaps already realized the importance of energy as a tool for power.
Было много махинаций с гуманитарной помощью, например. Когда гуманитарная помощь, которая должна была распределяться, она просто продавалась. И все. И деньги прикарманивались, клались в карманы чиновников и мошенников, которые торговали этим. То есть это был большой кризис в его карьере.
Скажем, воспринимая экономику по-другому. Он воспринимает ее как процесс, который можно контролировать постоянно.
Different scandals mark Putin's term of office as deputy mayor. He works with the port mafia and Spag, a German company accused of cocaine money laundering. He manages the city casinos whose profits disappear into thin air, gives the oil monopoly of the city to a friend.
But times are difficult, and Putin is not the only person to use organized crime networks. Now he is also in charge of law enforcement. He can do as he pleases. He takes his position of authority very seriously.
Если преступники обнаглели до того, что подняли руку на сотрудника милиции, сотрудники милиции должны реагировать мгновенно и жестко, а может быть даже жестоко. Только так мы можем подавить вот эту наглый вызов обществу, которое делает преступник. Только так. И на каждого убитого сотрудника 10 должно быть преступников положено. Ну, в рамках закона, конечно.
Что ему очень интересно, наблюдать за метаморфозами Владимира Путина, наблюдать за его изменениями и за его очень стремительным и быстрым ростом, потому что из человека, подполковника, который привык выполнять чужие команды, он превращается, делает это очень талантливо, в человека, который сам может иметь ответственность.
He strategically happened to be in all the right positions, all in the right time. He strategically worked for Sobchak and in fact, doing the KGB work for Sobchak. I actually think it's a sign of brilliance, the fact that he's such a gray matter, not a sign of his mediocrity.
Well established in St. Petersburg, Deputy Mayor Putin chooses ex-KGB officers and young liberals to work at his side. In the meantime, a former member of Sobchak's team, Anatoly Chubais, a brilliant young economist, joins Yeltsin's government in Moscow. As his influence increases, he obtains key jobs for colleagues from St. Petersburg. A few years later, Putin will be the first to benefit. Chubais invents a system of privatization, which makes a clear break with the economic rules of the Soviet regime.
There was 75 years of the Soviet Union when the private property was crime. That was crime.
Before the fall of the Soviet Union, promising businessmen had been given state assets to manage. They were the first to benefit from this new system of privatization.
These new businessmen decided that now they're free, they're their own masters. And for a while, they became what we know as oligarchs.
But the oligarchs had forgotten their moral contract to manage the property for the state. They would learn to regret it. In the meantime, they became millionaires overnight. The country is in a turmoil. Ordinary Russians quickly understand that they will not be the ones to benefit from the system of privatization. As for members of the political class, their views prefer to differ.
President Yeltsin attempts to modify the constitution and impose his policy of privatization. Russian parliament and the people resist. Yeltsin sends in the tanks. More than 150 people are killed. For the Russians, it's the first step towards the end of their dream for democracy. Observing the events from St. Petersburg, Putin realizes that from now on, in Yeltsin's democracy, the rules are going to be dictated.
When Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, democracy was the most popular word. 2 years later, it became a swear word.
They call it democracy, which is shitocracy, if you translate it.
A year later, Yeltsin's tanks move in again, this time in Chechnya. The Chechens are demanding their independence, and they must be prevented from taking control over the Russian pipeline crossing their lands. After a 2-year war and 80,000 victims, Chechnya obtains a peace settlement in its favor. For the Russians, it is a humiliating defeat. For Putin, it is far worse. Yeltsin is guilty of committing a crime against the state. Chechnya is part of Russia. Chechnya should be forced to submit.
In St. Petersburg, Putin organizes Sobchak's re-election campaign as mayor. Yeltsin has betrayed his democratic obligations, and if Sobchak wins these elections, Yeltsin's old ally could become a serious contender for the presidency. At Yeltsin's request, the oligarchs refused to help Sobchak finance his campaign.
В 1996 году возникла организованная Ельциным травля Анатолия Собчака. Ельцин видел в нем конкурента и хотел устранить с политической арены.
Sobchak loses the elections, and Putin is outraged by the increasing political power of the oligarchs. Declaring his loyalty to his political benefactor, he refuses to work with the new mayor. His future and that of Russia lie in Moscow.
After being a deputy mayor of St. Petersburg and nearly getting himself to jail for his connections with organized crime, he was actually made an official in the presidential administration.
Noting Putin's hard work and loyalty towards Sobchak, Anatoly Chubais finds him a position in the Kremlin State Property Department. The 1996 presidential elections are only a few weeks off, and Yeltsin's fears are justified. He has lost the confidence of the population. The communists are back in force. Their leader, Gennady Zyuganov, is the favorite in the polls.
Without politics, you are not able to protect your capital. Those people, the first in Russia, rich people who realize they need to take political responsibility for the future of the country. Because we already felt that time that reformers, headed by Yeltsin, are not able to stop communists. And it's the reason why we met together to cooperate and to win elections.
From inside the Kremlin, Putin watches the oligarchs transform what seemed an inevitable defeat into victory. Money and television make their stage entrance into Russian politics. Yeltsin names Berezovsky head of state television and finances NTV, the private station belonging to the millionaire Vladimir Guzinsky. Yeltsin becomes a TV czar, and television the major tool for his re-election.
TV in Russia is not a movie. TV in Russia is politics, no doubts. And using this leverage, we won presidential election.
Yeltsin owes his re-election to the oligarchs, but in doing so, he has become their hostage. He cannot stand for a third mandate. It's already time to think about organizing his succession.
It was clear from the experience which they had in '96 that the next presidential campaign will demand two major tools. One is a Russian TV channel which is going to support the next president, and a company which is going financially to stay behind the electoral campaign and support the candidate financially.
The oil company Sibneft is created with Roman Abramovich, Berezovsky's intriguing young business partner, as chairman. The state TV, directed by Boris Berezovsky, becomes a tool for state propaganda. A system is born to promote Yeltsin's successor. The elections are hardly over when Yeltsin falls ill again. He delegates his powers to the oligarchs Berezovsky and Abramovich, who have won their gamble in using their money to obtain political power. They literally command the country, with other members of a group known as the family. It includes Yeltsin's own daughter, Tatiana, and her future husband.
Close to this family, Anatoly Chubais continues to orchestrate Putin's advancement, promoting him 3 times in 2 years. Each post enables Putin to analyze the problems specific to Yeltsin's regime. Using his KGB methods and training, he discreetly files precious information for future purposes.
The oligarchs are looking for someone young, serious, but unpretentious, who will suit Yeltsin as his successor. Obedient and efficient, Vladimir Putin seems the perfect choice.
That was a typical oligarchic decision, to find the man who is not independent, who is dependent on them, and they had in mind that through him they would operate the country.
For some people, for some members of Yeltsin's family, and also Yeltsin's family friends, like Berezovsky, the oligarch, apparently these people looked at Putin as some kind of an insignificant personality who could be taken care of, who would be their puppet on the string.
In 1998, the family proposed Putin as head of the FSB, the former KGB. It is a decisive and symbolical step in his career, a chance to prove his loyalty and render important services to the regime.
Повторяю, для меня это родные стены, но это и огромное доверие со стороны президента страны, со стороны правительства.
Although a former KGB lieutenant colonel, Vladimir Putin is the first civilian in history to be nominated to this post. He now finally occupies the seat that his mentor Yuri Andropov had left 16 years earlier.
These oligarchs were hoping that Putin, who was promoted only to the rank of lieutenant colonel, which is not really very high, is not going to be loyal to FSB the way a general of FSB is going to be loyal.
But what the oligarchs fail to realize is that Vladimir Putin has never abandoned the KGB spirit and its ideology. He feels invested with a mission, and in the shadows, he patiently awaits his hour.
Protected by their political status, the oligarchs triple their fortunes, dilapidate millions, and invest massively offshore. In the meantime, many Russians are finding it hard to subsist. In summer 1998, the economic crash is inevitable. Yeltsin needs a firm hand at the helm to reassure the population. A KGB prime minister appears his best option. The first one, Soviet-style Evgeny Primakov, takes his mission too seriously and declares that he will put a halt to corruption and throw the oligarchs in jail. The population jubilates. Yeltsin and the family feel distinctly worried. Confident in the people's support, Primakov turns a blind eye. He nominates a new general prosecutor, Yuri Skuratov, to assist him. Skuratov's first inquiry starts within the walls of the Kremlin itself and concerns its sumptuous renovation. $66 million have been embezzled and are to be found on the bank accounts of high-ranking civil servants and members of the family. The general prosecutor is treading dangerous ground.
Не представляло с точки зрения техники. Оно было сложным. Почему? Потому что охватывало в орбиту и господина Ельцина.
And Yeltsin could not throw the prosecutor out because he had no legitimate legal power. So he asked Mr. Putin, could you do anything? And he said, yeah, well, no problem, we'll do it. So, you know, the prosecutor was framed at the KGB safe house with some of the prostitutes, and it was all on camera and shown on Russian television.
Сегодня директор ФСБ Владимир Путин сообщил журналистам, что скандальная видеокассета с изображением человека, похожего на Скуратова, подлинная. Другими словами, на ней заснят именно генеральный прокурор.
Skuratov is forced to resign.
Putin, in the eyes of Yeltsin, became someone who would never let him down. And in that sense, he is probably right. Putin keeps his word. I mean, in that sense, he knows his superiors, and he never betrayed them so far. And that's a fact. That's part of his character.
For Yeltsin, Mr. Putin, the head of the FSB, has passed his test. He deserves a reward.
Я решил назвать человека, который, по моему мнению, способен консолидировать общество. Владимир Владимирович Putin.
Putin's nomination as Prime Minister in August 1999 confirms that he has been approved of by the whole family, but he's still unknown to the population.
Все спрашивали, кто такой Путин? Вы помните этот вопрос «Who is Mr. Putin?» Вот Путину надо было сказать, кто он. Тут произошли взрывы московских домов.
In 3 weeks, explosions in several Russian towns kill 300 people. The government immediately accuses the Chechen rebels. But when another explosion is nipped in the bud and 2 terrorists are arrested, the Kremlin surprisingly orders the police to stop inquiries. Journalists discover what could well become a state affair. The terrorists in question are in fact members of the FSB.
And that's how, for the first time, Russian public opinion realized that the terrorist acts which took place in Moscow and Volgodonsk and Buynaksk might be the work of FSB.
NTV, the TV station belonging to Vladimir Gusinsky, broadcasts a debate on the implication of the FSB in the explosions, where FSB officials accuse one another of collusion. The public still finds this hard to believe. But journalists are pursuing their investigations, and as Prime Minister, Putin realizes that there is no time to be lost. He must create a diversion. He decides to exploit the population's hatred for the Chechens.
Чечня считалась могилой для любого политика. Многие были очень испуганы и считали, что Путин должен дистанцироваться. Но Путин здесь проявил упрямство. И потом, неожиданно для большинства, оказалось его выигрышем.
Трудно назвать этих людей людьми. Их даже зверями назвать нельзя. Если это звери, то бешеные.
То тут средний класс разозлился, буржуа разозлился. И Путин реагировал так же, как они. Вот это именно тут начинает возникать эта позиция «я такой же парень, как вы». «Я во власти такой же человек, как вы».
Мы будем преследовать террористов везде. В аэропорту. Значит, вы уж меня извините, в туалете поймаем, и в сортире их замочим, в конце концов. Все, вопрос закрыт окончательно.
Я думаю, Путин становится Путиным. Он приобретает язык, приобретает свободу, легкость, с которой он выходит на контакт и уже не боится никакой аудитории.
То, что касается, вот будем мочить в сортире, я его тоже за это ругала. Что такие за выражения? Где ты понабрался? Я такого в жизни не слышала. Во-первых, где это сортир ты это слышал? Он оправдывался передо мной и говорил, ну, вы понимаете, я не выдержал.
For the last 3 centuries, many Russians and their leaders have resented the Chechen bandits, as they call them. The Chechens have always refused to submit to Russian dominance. Stalin deported them by thousands. Yeltsin's peace treaty is felt as a humiliation, and for the population, the recent explosions are a provocation. Their Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin, is entirely justified in declaring a new war. Berezovsky asks Sergei Dorlienko, the star journalist of his TV station, to put his political news magazine at the service of Vladimir Putin.
Я должен сказать, что он меня часто просил как бы немножко спровоцировать ситуацию. Например, когда я требовал, чтобы наши войска вошли в Чечню, он мне говорил: Сереж, скажите, вот вы скажите об этом. Я говорю: я и так скажу, что вы меня просите, я хочу, чтобы вы сказали. А он говорит: а вы скажите, а мы посмотрим, как люди отреагируют. То есть он пытался через меня понять, правильно ли действовать, так или сяк. То есть он через меня пытался как бы пальпировать вот электорат, да?
On the 1st of October, Russian bombers attacked Grozny, the capital of Chechnya. With Berezovsky's state TV and the population behind him, Putin throws Russia into a ferocious war. The Chechen people are the victims of unprecedented barbarity.
Путин действительно зарекомендовал себя перед российским избирателем как жесткий политик, готовый идти на жесткие шаги, готовый к принятию жестких политических решений, а может быть даже и будущий военный лидер российского государства.
Satisfied with his conduct, the family decide to create a political party for Putin in the next parliamentary elections. There are 2 months to go. Made to measure by Boris Berezovsky, Unity, later to become United Russia, has a single item on its agenda: the promotion of Vladimir Putin. If his party wins, he will be confirmed as a legitimate successor to Boris Yeltsin. The state TV and Abramovich and his oil company Sibneft provide media and financial support.
This time, Guzinski and his station NTV, who are against the war in Chechnya, support Putin's main rival, the former Prime Minister, Evgeny Primakov. Berezovsky sinks to the lowest tricks to discredit the enemy.
For sure, we used election technology, which are very specific in Russia. We use power of mass media, not in a soft way like you use it on the West, in very strong and very hard way.
Mission accomplished for Berezovsky. Unity's score confirms Putin's political dominance. Everyone gets ready for the New Year's Eve festivities, unaware that behind the Kremlin walls, Yeltsin and his Prime Minister, Vladimir Putin, are preparing the final act to the strategy of these last months. On the 31st of December, Yeltsin summons Putin to his office, gives him the nuclear attaché case, and names him president by interim until the presidential elections. For his part of the deal, Putin offers Yeltsin and his family total immunity and a large pension for life. A way for Yeltsin to avoid destitution and legal pursuit for his crimes against the state.
What Yeltsin probably didn't realize is that Putin is loyal to his mission and not towards the men he has served. For him, Yeltsin is guilty of dismantling the Soviet Union, of losing the first war in Chechnya, and of leading Russia towards auto-destruction. It was essential to remove him from power once and for all.
Сегодня я в последний раз обращаюсь к вам как президент России. Я ухожу.
On New Year's Eve, crowds pressed to the Bolshoi Theatre in Moscow to catch a glimpse of Yeltsin's chosen successor. In vain. The presidential box remains empty. Putin has lost no time in publicly showing his priorities. He and his wife have left the city the same evening to join the troops on the Chechen front. In front of the television cameras, he offers the soldiers 200 daggers, especially engraved for the occasion. A symbolic present for the men who are fighting the Chechen guerrilla.
Symbolically also, Putin has laid the first brick in his presidential election campaign. His image makers now have to make him a charismatic figure that will charm the Russian electorate.
Полагалось, что он должен показать разными способами показать, что он здоровый человек, что он здоровый, сильный, молодой человек в сравнении с Ельциным, что он может летать на самолете, может, так сказать, лично посещать подводную лодку.
Putin is a quick learner. He learns how to appear in public. He's a good sport and appears to be a perfect gentleman. He even shows that he can smile. Radio programs receive thousands of love letters from women infatuated with the new Russian hero. But a few details still need a bit of polish.
И походка твоя была совсем, я говорю, не президентская. Надо работать над своей походкой и забывать свои борцовые вот эти вот в развалочку. Он говорит, и то правда, мне и дома сказали, что ты ходишь как пингвин. Я говорю, да хуже того. Так что я говорю, ты, пожалуйста, каждый день хоть минутку удели своей походке. Сейчас по-другому совсем ходит. Работаем, продолжаем работать.
While Putin takes part in village fetes, the violence of the Chechen war, an important element in his campaign, intensifies. The massacre in Chechnya doesn't stop the Orthodox Church from supporting Putin. In spite of Soviet repression, the population is still strongly religious. Putin, the man of modest origins, makes it known to the people that he still wears the tin cross given to him by his mother at his christening.
Now he is very religious, and he speaks, confessing to the Patriarch himself, to the head of the Russian Orthodox Church. The Patriarch has been for 40 years agent of the KGB. And who is the case officer of the Patriarch? General Patrushev, head of the KGB. So the Patriarch tells Mr. Patrushev about everything. And Mr. Patrushev is visiting the next day the president and telling him everything. It is like a joke.
He started to appeal to all people around him. He started to appeal to reformers, to liberals, to Democrats, to nationalists, to statists, to Russians and Muslims. And a lot of people considered him as their own guy. He's just a guy from our street.
Only the head of the Communist Party, Gennady Zyuganov, remains a serious contender for Putin. Other candidates hardly dare criticize him. He seems to represent everything the population could desire. To further convince electors, Putin presents his manifesto, entitled Russia on the Brink of the Third Millennium. He promises to make the country autonomous and respected in the world. Not only the Russian electorate, but also the West discover Russia's new face, or so they think.
Putin's manifesto, with which he introduced himself to the Russian electorate as a presidential candidate, rather than just, you know, the hero of the Chechen crackdown, was a stunning document. It was broadly liberal. It had a vision of a Russian institutional evolution that made it quite possible to think of Putin as a Westernizer.
Western politicians are mistaken. Putin's political vision is different from anything in the West. He indeed promises to reform justice and the institutions, but he also talks of a managed democracy and the vertical of power. He combines without any hesitation contradictory values such as liberalism and statism, democracy and dictatorship. Both in Russia and abroad, people only see the mark of someone capable of putting an end to political and economic chaos.
These elections are all but a remake of the 1996 poll. But if Zyuganov had his chances against the ailing Yeltsin, this time he has lost before he starts. Putin graciously uses him as a sparring partner to guarantee his own victory.
There was a very good joke at that time. A fox asks the crow, "Are you going to vote for Putin?" The crow keeps silent because it knows, open the mouth, the cheese will drop. Well, tell me, are you going to vote for Putin or not? Well, say yes or no. Yes, said the crow, and cheese dropped down. Fox ran away with it. And a very sad crow sits on the top of a tree and muses. Suppose I would have said no. Would it change anything? That was typical Russian attitude at that time. What is the choice? Either it will be a communist leader, Zyuganov, or it will be a KGB colonel. I mean, is that the choice? Is that a real election?
On March the 26th, 2000, Vladimir Putin is elected outright in the first ballot with a 52% majority as President of the Federation of Russia.
Клянусь уважать и охранять права и свободы человека и гражданина. Соблюдать и защищать Конституцию Российской Федерации. Защищать суверенитет. И независимость.
Beyond these ceremonious words, Vladimir Putin, the man from the KGB, has not forgotten the teenage dream and his mission to restore the nation to its former power. His goals are to develop the strategic resources for the state: oil, gas, the media, other industries, to restore military power and revive the sense of national pride and identity. Putin himself owed much of his success to television. It was the first tool he needed to possess. The oligarchs who owned the media had monopolized political power and vandalized the state. They had taken him for a puppet. Now the tables have turned. Yeltsin has been evinced. It is their turn to pay for their crimes.
The new president uses tactics for his first move. He decides to operate through the state-owned energy giant Gazprom, which has important assets in the media.
So it's not a wonder that Mr. Putin, who came into power in 2000, obviously took this opportunity and, to me, literally directly headed Gazprom himself, appointing his representative, Mr. Miller, as a formal CEO of this company. Mr. Putin literally makes decisions on important business transactions or important investment projects by himself. This means that he's in fact the CEO of Gazprom.
In the Kremlin, Putin calls on former colleagues and ex-KGB officers in St. Petersburg to join his team. Alexei Miller is one of them. Gazprom is the perfect tool to attack Vladimir Gusinsky, owner of the private TV station NTV, financed by loans from the energy giant.
So all Putin actually did is demanded for his loan to be returned to Gazprom. And at that moment, financially and economically, Gusinsky was ruined, of course. And it was clear to everybody this move is political.
The rebel oligarch is incarcerated in June 2000 for embezzlement. The court allows him to leave the country provided he turns over the majority of his NTV stocks to Gazprom. Under the cover of the law and the fight against corruption, Putin has started to hunt down the enemy within and a campaign against the independent media. Boris Berezovsky, the oligarch who had helped Putin to become president, also begins to realize that the wind has changed. Gusinsky has fled. Berezovsky is the only oligarch who is not invited to the first meeting organized by Putin. For the remaining oligarchs, Putin announces it's business as usual, but politics are out. Putin is beginning to show what stuff he's made of. Berezovsky has considered him to be a mere pawn to serve his own interests. And for Putin, humiliation is a powerful incentive for cold and calculated revenge. Berezovsky's fate is strangely linked to an event that jeopardizes Vladimir Putin's own political career. In August 2000, 3 months after his investiture, the annual Navy exercises are to show the whole world that Russian military power is not to be underrated. But two mysterious explosions send the pride of the fleet, the nuclear submarine Kursk, to the floor of the Barents Sea. Putin refuses assistance from abroad and remains silent for several days. The 118 submariners on board perish in the depths. The Russian people are angry. The press accuses Putin of contempt for the families. Berezovsky, who still imagines he's the master of the situation, jumps at the opportunity to publicly denounce the president's incompetence.
After the Kursk case, Putin definitely decides to take TV channel from Berezovsky, and that's when the open conflict between Berezovsky and Putin started.
Like his colleague, Kuczynski, Berezovsky is accused of embezzlement and flees the country to avoid jail.
Berezovsky wanted to be the boss. Only because of Berezovsky's immense ambitions, he was out. He had to be out. Another oligarch who was out, Mr. Kuczynski, he also wanted to be the boss and rule Russia through the television. They misunderstood that there only and always is only one boss in the Kremlin.
Kuczynski and Berezovsky have been eliminated, but their journalists refuse to believe that the freedom of the press is under attack. Apparently democratic, Putin allows programs to continue. In the satirical show Kuklis, the Russian Muppets, the journalist Evgeny Kiselyov is in the grips of an evil Vladimir Putin.
Что это значит, черт возьми?
Я прочитал твою статью о себе. Мне не понравилось. Ты должен написать другую статью.
Вы что, против свободы слова?
Нет, я не против. Но я закрою твою газету, если ты не будешь мне повиноваться.
Putin's idea of democracy does not allow for criticism of authority. 1 year after his arrival in power, Gazprom finalizes the takeover of NTV. Early one morning, armed men invade the television studios. When they arrive, the journalists discover that a team from the Kremlin has replaced them. Putin gives one warning, but if unheeded, he is pitiless. Kiselyov and others find themselves jobs on one small station still belonging to Berezovsky. A few months later, it is also taken over and replaced by a sports channel.
Because there is only one key word for KGB mentality. The word is control. What you control is safe. What you don't control is a threat. So it means that you should try control as many things as possible.
A few days after the election as president, he went to the Dzerzhinsky Club. It is a big theater. There were 800 officers. And Mr. Putin went to the front of the stage.
Группа сотрудников ФСБ, направленные вами в командировку для работы под прикрытием правительства, на первом этапе со своими задачами справляется.
Mr. Putin realized it is his card to use, the KGB as man of the KGB. Such a huge support. Remember I told you, I'm your man.
During the Cold War, the hunt for Western spies was one of the principal activities of the KGB. Putin immediately shows the West, and in particular the United States, that the secret services, now called the FSB, are back. Edmund Pope, a former intelligence officer of the US Navy, is arrested and tried for spying.
They had to make an example, and boom, here comes this time, so they grab me and use me as an example. Several of the FSB officers at the prison point blank told me the reason I was there was strictly a political event. They wanted to make a very, very clear break from the Yeltsin administration.
Этой стране, как любому полицейскому государству, нужны два врага. Внутренний и внешний. Без врагов эта система жить не может. Точно так же, как в Советском Союзе.
Stalin's national anthem returns, with the words rewritten by the same author, and many older Russians are comforted to see the red flag of their youth flutter in military parades again.
Возвращаются какие-то символы, и главное, возвращается вот это чувство, вот, которое он хочет внушить всем. Мы все принадлежим к великой стране, и вы все должны знать, что великая страна. А великая, значит, нас всех уважают, нас все уважают, или даже, может быть, нас все боятся. Мы очень важные. Вместе со старыми тоталитарными стереотипами, которые сидят в головах очень многих людей. А тоталитарный стереотип какой? Я маленький человек, а есть великое государство.
It is easy to rekindle the nostalgia of the older generation, but the young have no memories. Putin's political advisors create a youth movement called Nashi. 1 year after his election, 10,000 young people gather on the Red Square to celebrate the anniversary. In 2002, they are 20,000. In 2004, 50,000. And in 2007, 100,000.
15 лет назад у нас была огромная, великая страна. Так и не рассеялись по всему миру и не пропали как народ, мы, как более безалаберные, можем исчезнуть.
Nashi, an army for Putin, funded by Gazprom.
(9/11, 2001). Putin is the first head of state to contact George W. Bush. This gesture brings him into the international limelight.
Россия не понаслышке знает, что такое террор. И поэтому мы лучше всего понимаем чувства американского народа. Обращаясь от имени России к народу Соединенных Штатов, хочу сказать, что мы с вами.
Obviously, he was sympathetic, and I assume sincerely so. But it is also in the interest of the Kremlin and of Putin to ally himself with the United States and to make whoever is the opponent of Russia be viewed as a terrorist by the Americans.
Of course, this friendship gave the time for the Putinist Russia to build a new military weaponry and new force, again threatening, as they announce, threatening the world, to get eyes kept off Russian atrocities, even the level of genocide in Chechnya, because Russia is needed for something other.
Since 9/11, the Cold War has become past history. Russia and the USA are on their honeymoon. George Bush has been invited to Moscow to sign a treaty on the reduction of their nuclear arsenals that neither country has any intention of respecting. The real reason for their meeting is quite different. The two presidents signed no less than 67 agreements on oil and gas. Shortly afterwards, Vladimir Putin declares, whoever controls the production, the distribution, and the price of oil controls power in today's world. With emotion, George W. Bush declares, when I looked deep into the eyes of Vladimir Putin, I could see a fellow soul.
Looking at the icy eyes of KGB agent and being moved by deepness of the soul. That is worrying. The West will awake, but West is losing the time. The losses in time may be turned into losses in independence.
Energy is at the center of the political operations of Russia, and also internally, and also it's critical to Russia's presence on the world stage.
If you use that as opposed to ideology as the foundation for your increased position in the world, Russia is going to return to a significantly prominent position in the global affairs.
American multinationals see Putin's expansionism with a grim eye. They construct two pipelines bypassing Russia, from Baku in Azerbaijan to Ceyhan. The honeymoon between the USA and Russia is over. The first shots have been fired in the new energy war.
And pipelines are different than just general commercial agreements. Pipelines hardwire relationships. They represent an enormous investment of billions of dollars, and they create a link between countries that's really very different than almost any other kind of commercial arrangement.
The Yukos oil tycoon, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, understood this link long before Putin's arrival on the scene. At the fall of the Soviet Union, he and other oligarchs had associated themselves with Western companies, exploiting Russian oil fields to make personal fortunes. Khodorkovsky plans to clinch further deals with the US. He has also ignored Putin's warning to keep out of politics. Putin's reaction is as to be expected. Like Gusinsky and Berezovsky before him, Khodorkovsky is arrested for tax evasion. He's sentenced to 8 years in Siberia. His companies are taken over by Gazprom with support from Western banks invited to open branches in St. Petersburg when a certain Vladimir Putin was deputy mayor. Through the Yukos-Khodorkovsky affair, Putin makes it clear to the West that his new weapon is energy, and nothing will stop him from using it to rebuild Russia's greatness.
It was some kind of demonstration that power is the strongest institute in Russia. The president in Russia, the vertical of power in Russia, it is institute of something like Byzantine system. Tsar. Tsar decided and Tsar did it.
When Putin next summons the oligarchs, no one evokes the subject which is uppermost in their minds, the fate of Khodorkovsky. If anyone dares contradict the president, they know they are out for good. To elaborate his system of control, Putin creates his own oligarchy. State officials and members of his clan, they are all former KGB officers or St. Petersburg liberals.
Putin runs corporation. For him, Russia is a corporation, it's a business. They're nationalizing all the expenses and they're privatizing the profits. Gazprom is one of the best examples. The moment the gas enters the pipeline, it's a state monopoly. The moment the gas is sold, it's a private company. You want to find the cleanest oligarch system in the history of human race. Putin created this one. That's a time when there's no difference, no frontier, no visible frontier between business and the government. Money rules the country and the government controls the money.
So it's a different approach, but the substance is the same. The substance is that the law is not for us, that we are operating justice, that we are operating everything, that we can just do whatever we want. But he also brought ideology to that, saying that this is a way at the moment to create great Russia.
Mr. Sechin, Mr. Patrushev, Mr. Viktor Ivanov, Mr. Medvedev, Mr. Surkov, Mr. Sobyanin, well, I'm not sure the world knows about that, but of course Russians do know. They do know that Putin's lieutenants, unfortunately, these people who rule Russia on behalf of the presidency, they don't have one very important thing. They don't have accountability for what is happening.
That is vertical. I mean, that you cannot be more vertical than that. And so, you know, he did what he promised, and that's what's sort of remarkable about him. When he promised, it sounded like it's going to be beneficial to Russia. But somehow, when we turn around, all of a sudden, instead of benefiting us, benefited his idea of the state.
Vladimir Putin is candidate for a second presidential mandate in 2004.
Opposition in Russia is not fighting for winning elections. Opposition in Russia is fighting for having elections. Any election held from 1993 to nowadays was marked by growing government interference. And today, of course, it's not an election, it's a more of a Soviet-type vote when the results is already being fixed before the election results are announced.
In March 2004, Putin wins the elections with an outright majority of 71%. He has 4 more years to consolidate his policies. He presides over what has become a single-party system. His party, renamed Russia United, receives its orders from the Kremlin. Opposition parties have no power. Political debate has ceased to exist. To regain control is also Putin's objective for the former republics of the Soviet Union. They are more and more openly coveted by the United States, who are eager to create a barrier to Russian expansionism. Ukraine, symbolically and strategically the most important of these countries, is at the crossroads for the transit of Russian oil and gas to Europe.
С приходом Путина осуществлялся такой геополитический проект под названием «Единое экономическое пространство», где ведущая роль отводилась России. ЕЭП – это был абсолютно антизападный проект. Это была попытка ослабить влияние Запада, Европы, США на постсоветское пространство.
The Ukrainian presidential elections are in October 2004. The pro-Russian authoritarian regime is in difficulty, but Putin has no intention of letting Ukraine choose the path to democracy. The FSB and Putin's advisors collaborate closely with Ukrainian intelligence services to ensure the victory of Putin's protege, Viktor Yanukovych. At the climax of the election campaign, Viktor Yushchenko, the pro-Western candidate, is poisoned and badly disfigured. But this doesn't deter him or the Ukrainian people. On the 20th of December, after an agitated poll, the Orange Revolution leads him to victory.
Она по существу была антироссийской. Она была антиимперской, если иметь в виду имперские российские Кремля. Я думаю, что Путин потерпел наибольшее поражение, геополитическое поражение в своей карьере.
For Putin, it is more than a failure. It's a humiliation. But there are other ways to show Ukraine that she will not escape from Russia's hold.
То после оранжевой революции нефтяная политика в отношении Украины стала более жесткой и более активно используются нефтяные рычаги в качестве влияния на Украину.
On the 1st of January 2006, the Kremlin cuts off the gas supplies to Ukraine.
This action was, from the beginning, intended to show the Ukraine and Europe how powerful Russia is in terms of its influence with regard to gas supplies.
But the Kremlin's blackmail has only just begun. Parliamentary elections are coming up, And Russia continues its intimidation by stopping the importation of Ukrainian goods. Putin's message is clear. The pro-Russian Yanukovych must become prime minister. If the Ukrainians vote for his party, everything will return to normal. Today, the deed is done. Yanukovych is prime minister, and Ukraine is moving away from Europe and NATO. In Ukraine, Putin demonstrates his capacity to use any means to transform a failure into victory.
Но сегодня, я думаю, Путин чувствует себя, наоборот, очень комфортно. Он просто испытывает некое чувство превосходства. По-моему, это чувство в данном случае оправдано.
Putin is right to be confident. He's the king of the largest gas field in the world. In 2005, Putin signs an agreement with Chancellor Gerhard Schröder for a pipeline under the Baltic Sea linking Russia to Western Europe, making it more dependent on Russian gas. But he doesn't stop there. The same year, he signs a treaty with another friend, Silvio Berlusconi, and the Turkish Prime Minister for the construction of the Blue Stream pipelines serving Central and Southern Europe. Gazprom's giant tentacles will not only engulf all European countries, but also Japan, China, and South America. Putin's objectives? A transnational government around Gazprom. Russia's future challenge to American world dominance. But Gazprom is also oil, uranium, banks, the media, football teams, and its future business temple, an architectural feat in St. Petersburg. Putin is at the summit of one of the most powerful empires in the world.
Если ваши западные лидеры Франции, Германии, Америки, Англии, Японии, Канады, Италии говорят: дорогой друг, да? Вы знаете, что происходит в Чечне, я это уже говорил. Они, уж, конечно, ваши лидеры знают, что здесь происходит. И они говорят: ничего, потому что газ и нефть, и все.
Gerd und Vladi, Politik zum Schmusen schön.
The Russian government is explaining that he's fighting
Putin is so sure of his hold over European countries that when, during a summit, a French journalist criticizes the war in Chechnya, he hits back below the belt.
Killing hundreds of people. Given this, don't you think that by trying to eradicate terrorism in Chechnya, you are going to eradicate the civilian population of Chechnya?
Если вы хотите совсем уж стать исламским радикалом и готовы пойти на то, чтобы сделать себе обрезание, то я вас приглашаю в Москву. У нас многоконфессиональная страна, у нас есть специалисты по этому вопросу. И я порекомендую ему сделать эту операцию таким образом, чтобы у вас уже больше ничего не выросло.
A new tragedy reminds the Russians of the situation in Chechnya. Hostages taken by terrorists are held in a school in Beslan in the northern Caucasus. Russian special forces storm the school. 186 children can be counted among the 344 civilian victims. The Kursk catastrophe in 2000, the hostage-taking in a Moscow theater in 2002, and now Beslan. This is the third major crisis for Vladimir Putin in 4 years. Signs that his governance has serious flaws. Things have to change. On the 31st of January 2005, Putin declares that the war between Russia and Chechnya is over. Russia will no longer be responsible for the atrocities committed in Chechnya. Putin has transformed the conflict into a civil war by nominating Ramzan Kadyrov, the son of the recently assassinated pro-Russian president, as prime minister. Kadyrov's ferocious militia replaces the regiments of the Russian army.
Это, конечно, сегодня то, на что может рассчитывать Путин спустя или по истечении 10 лет войны в Чечне. Вот это Рамзан Кадыров и вот его убийцы и преступники, которые за ним стоят, вот это и есть и политическое, и военное подспорье Путина в Чечне.
И получается, что одни чеченцы уничтожают других чеченцев, русские вроде бы как бы даже в стороне, и одни чеченцы держат в страхе других чеченцев. И у большинства, конечно, населения страх, абсолютное ощущение несправедливости.
The Kremlin offers a reward of $100,000 for the assassination of the rebel leaders. In 2005, the first, Aslan Maskhadov, former elected president and protagonist for peace, is killed by the Russian special services. In 2006, it is the turn of Shamil Basayev, the fundamentalist leader. The wars in Chechnya have decimated 200,000 inhabitants, 20% of the population. But more insidiously, Putin has destroyed the self-respect and identity of the whole nation. As for Gazprom, a new pipeline will soon be crossing Chechen territory, linking Baku to Central Europe.
After Beslan, he was speaking and he said, "We've been working very hard to salvage the remnants of the Soviet Union any way we possibly can." And I was shocked. I mean, I didn't know that that's what we were working on. In fact, I thought we were working on overcoming those remnants, but apparently not. And that's, I mean, that quote says it all in a way. It's that his mission is to salvage the remnants of the Soviet Union any way we can. And that becomes personal.
Any semblance of democracy has vanished. Putin installs an openly authoritarian regime. He personally nominates the regional governors and magistrates, passes a decree reducing the freedom of journalists, another refusing visas to foreigners lacking in respect. The FSB creates groups of civilian informers, and to avoid a replica of the Ukrainian uprising, Putin reduces the possibility for foreign funding of NGOs.
Putin knows that when you want to gag the enemy within, you must also gag the enemy without. The Americans break their silence.
No legitimate interest is served when oil and gas become tools of intimidation or blackmail, either by supply manipulation or attempts to monopolize transportation. And no one can justify actions that undermine the territorial integrity of a neighbor or interfere with democratic movements. Yet in Russia today, in many areas of civil society, from religion and the news media to advocacy groups and political parties, the government has unfairly and improperly restricted the rights of her people.
Unlike the Europeans, the Americans take Putin's nationalist and authoritarian offensive very seriously. Their world dominance could be put to question. They announced their plan to install anti-missile batteries in Eastern Europe. Putin retaliates.
Их военный бюджет в абсолютных величинах почти в 25 раз больше, чем у России. Вот это и называется в оборонной сфере их дом, их крепость. И молодцы, молодцы. Но это значит, что и мы с вами должны строить свой дом, свой собственный дом, крепким, надежным. Потому что мы же видим, что в мире происходит. Но мы же это видим. Как говорится, товарищ волк знает, кого кушать. Кушает и никого не слушает. И слушать, судя по всему, не собирается.
Energy is considered to be Russia's new strategic weapon. but its nuclear arsenal has 8,000 more nuclear warheads than the USA. Russia is the second biggest arms exporter in the world, supplying no less than 61 countries. Between energy dependence and arms sales, Russia possesses the two most powerful geostrategic instruments in the world.
The legacy of the Cold War is that Russia and the United States are still the two largest military powers in the world, particularly with regard to nuclear weapons. And since Russia has them in the thousands that can reach the United States, in terms of how U.S. weapons are targeted, Russia is still by far the primary target. Putin's willingness to sell military and nuclear technology to China, to Iran, to Venezuela, to other countries that the United States is at least suspicious of, if not actively hostile. But there could come a point where it goes beyond that, you know, where Putin tries to restore the kind of superpower proxy battles that happened during the Cold War.
И более того, мы развиваем свой ядерный комплекс сдерживания. Как вы знаете, недавно провели испытания новых систем баллистического оружия. В позапрошлом году успешно проведены испытания таких боевых комплексов, которых пока нет, и вряд ли раньше нас появятся на вооружении других стран мира.
We could see the world in 5 or 10 years when the Middle East is dominated by Iran, with Russia in background. When Americans are pushed out, humiliated, kicked.
Russians today love Putin. If you look at approval ratings, I mean, he has 65% approval rating, with a huge approval rating. He may look as if he's attending to people's businesses because that's what we see on TV, and, you know, very much like Stalin, in fact. We saw Stalin attending to the public and, you know, being an expert in everything from, you know, studying of languages to national politics to athletes, whatever. Putin is kind of the same thing. And while in Stalin's case, maybe he needed some sort of arm twisting for people to believe that he was the greatest, in Putin's case, somehow it all happens voluntarily.
This popularity is illusion. If you switch on Russian news every night, you will see Putin only with good news, never bad news. It's a joke that if Putin on TV screen, it's a good news. If somebody else, it may be bad news, but never Putin, only good news. He increasing pensions, he increasing salaries, he fighting oligarchs, he speaking with Bush, Schroeder and Merkel. Brezhnev was superstar, Stalin was superstar. In every authoritarian regime there is only one superstar.
Я знаю, что молодые люди, которые занимаются бизнесом, они, по-моему, уже не интересуются ни прошлым, ни политикой, и, в общем, их все устраивает. И этих людей очень много. Они люди системы. Это люди путинской системы. Они готовы закрывать глаза на уменьшение области свободы. Она им не особенно нужна.
In Moscow today, consumerism is the new religion. The heart of the Russian capital throbs to the inflow of gas and petrodollars. The more you pay, the better. Moscow has overtaken the West at an incredible speed. No other capital in the world counts so many millionaires. Luxury stores, giant advertisements, top-priced cars, casinos. A new middle class has emerged in Moscow, doping retail sales. The richest buy yachts, private jets, works of art, skiing resorts. In London, where the most expensive properties are the new dachas of the Muscovites, some business tycoons even invest in famous football clubs. While near Moscow, the trendiest create country clubs, Russian style.
Putin's regime is very good in creating illusions that reflect the general belief that Russia's economy is growing, it's all blossoming, and of course, in the center of Moscow, you will get these feelings. If you start traveling 50 miles outside of center of Moscow, it's like taking a ride in a time machine. So in St. Petersburg, you don't have to go that far. It's about 100 meters from Nevsky Prospect, one way or another, and you are immediately entering the Dostoevsky St. Petersburg of the 19th century.
The enemies of the Soviet regime, like the intellectuals and the former dissidents that support the Sakharov Foundation, are the targets of Putin's regime, as in the days of Yuri Andropov. These men and women contested the injustice, the repression, and the very essence of the Soviet system, and often paid for it in the Gulag.
Никто из людей моего поколения не думал, что Советский Союз, что мы доживем до краха коммунистической системы. И когда это произошло, то мы все считали, что это уже никогда не вернется. Но я боюсь, что это вернулось.
The presidential elections of 2008 are approaching. The pervading atmosphere created by the regime incites acts of violence towards its opponents. Disillusioned, one of Putin's former advisors, Marat Gelman, has created an alternative movement where art is the means of expression. His gallery is ransacked.
Испугался, что они решили меня доконать. Начал кричать. Один из них что-то перестань, я, значит, еще громче кричать. Тогда они взяли компьютер, бросили прямо в меня его и ушли.
Нет репрессиям! Нет репрессиям! Нет репрессиям! Нет репрессиям!
Not all young people have been won over by Putin, like the members of Nashi or the Young Guards, a political movement. 20 teenage activists occupy a citizens' complaints bureau in the presidential administration, demanding Putin's resignation. Seven are sentenced to 5 years in jail.
On the 23rd of September 2006, Putin receives the Legion d'honneur from President Jacques Chirac. Strangely, only Russian television is permitted to film the event.
Почему это мировые лидеры выстраиваются в очередь пожать руку какому-то Путину? Он вообще достоин пожатия руки? Это есть вопрос, но этот вопрос перед собой никто не ставит.
Anna Politkovskaya is the 22nd journalist assassinated since Putin's arrival in power. She was about to publish an investigation on the torture carried out in Chechnya by Ramzan Kadyrov's armed gangs. She is killed in the entrance to her apartment block on October the 7th, 2006, Vladimir Putin's birthday. A sinister present, commissioned perhaps by Kadyrov himself. 5 months later, in March 2007, Putin appoints Kadyrov as president of the Republic of Chechnya.
Alexander Litvinenko, former officer of the FSB, was also a defender of the Chechen cause. He emigrated to London after denouncing the implication of the FSB in the Moscow bomb explosions imputed to the Chechens in 1999.
After her book was published, her book Putin's Russia, she had quite a number of threats which became more frequent directly from the Kremlin. And during our last meeting, one of our last meetings, she asked me directly, can they kill me? Do you think they can kill me?
Alexander Litvinenko will never reveal the conclusions to his investigation on Anna Politkovskaya's murder. Poisoned by a highly radioactive substance, he dies 1 month later. A list of 100 people to be eliminated was put into circulation on the internet. Several people interviewed in this film are on the list. They have nevertheless accepted to voice their opinions.
Я, конечно же, думаю, что выбор времени для убийства Литвиненко, как и выбор времени для убийства Политковской, связаны прежде всего с президентской кампанией 2008 года.
Who do these crimes benefit? Several theories exist, but the absence of justice in Russia makes it improbable that those behind the murders ever be brought to justice. If the constitution is not modified, Putin cannot be a candidate for a third term of office in 2008. But he can again in 2012. Or maybe before. Who knows?
Putin has been smart enough to organize a new configuration of power, creating several clans or groups. Apparently understanding that if he has only one group to rely upon, he'll be done with. He'll lose his independence. And he can only survive, he can only survive by being moderator, the upper judge, and presiding over the bickering of the dogs behind the carpet.
Losing power means, at best, losing the property they acquired, but more likely losing freedom. So they are fighting for their survival. Staying in Kremlin is the only guarantee, the only immunity against imminent prosecution, because what they committed staying there, the way they acquired this multi-billion-dollar fortune, will be inevitably investigated.
I think as brilliant as he is, he may not even need to change the constitution to get what he wants. KGB mind, as simple as it is, it's also very devious. And it deviates to the point that probably normal minds cannot comprehend or predict. So this would be my amendment. Even if he doesn't change it, there are certain things in store.
So the day you would finalize your movie, the things can change dramatically. And the main forecast for Russia is unpredictability, because Russia is in transition, is a very unstable authoritarian system, and everything can happen.
Anything is indeed possible in Russia, but unpredictability never goes beyond these stairs. Within the secrecy of the Kremlin walls, the leader and his cabal control the state, the economy, and the destiny of the people. Vladimir Putin has succeeded in his mission. He has established the vertical of power, stabilized the economy, and made Russia an important player on the world stage again. The former KGB is more powerful than ever before in history. But what choice do the Russian people really have? Whatever Putin's regime be called, dictocracy or militocracy, his chosen successor will continue to perpetrate his system, privatizing the state with former members of the KGB, ignoring the rule of law, and curbing freedom of thought. As for Russia's economic and diplomatic confrontation with the United States, its impact on the redivision of the world will concern not only the Russian people, but also the future of us all.